fight to protect voting rights. Last session, the infamous voter suppression bill was given a hearing with only a couple days' notice. Beto picked up the phone, he called me, and he asked, what do y'all need? We said we need people. We need lots and lots of people, and we only have a couple days to get them to come to the Capitol. Beto drove through the night from El Paso. He showed up that morning with hundreds and hundreds of people who took over the Capitol, stood in the face of voter suppression, and told their story. When those stories fell on deaf ears, my colleagues, Cheryl Colby, one of them, and I, we packed up, we went to D.C., and we wrote for them with the goal of bringing the national spotlight to our fight here in Texas. This time calling our chairman, he said, what do y'all need? Within 2 days, all of you in this room, grassroots across the state, helped him raise us over $600,000 so we could stay in D.C. for the duration of that special session. What do y'all need? And then he sought solutions to the problem. That's what Texas needs in a government. Right now we have a government that pushes a far extreme agenda, placating to the few. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can elect someone that will solve the problems that we all face. But we have to work hard. We have to embrace the grassroots, as we did in Williamson County, as we're doing across the state. We've got to spend some time knocking on doors, making phone calls, embracing the voters, bringing them to the polls, telling our personal story. And if we keep pushing, we can bring about that change.
Yeah.
This governor has continued to fail us. But if we remember what President Obama told us, he said, we, each and every one of you in this room, are the ones we've been waiting for. Beto O'Rourke has said the cavalry's not coming. We are the cavalry.
Yeah.
There are 29 million Texans. If we work together, we can build the future we deserve, and that starts by electing Beto O'Rourke. So help me welcome.
Grateful that you would come out on a weekday. You've got a lot going on. Some of you are on spring break, or you've got kiddos who are on spring break, and you could be at the beach right now, drinking a beer, crashing into those waves, but you're taking part in your democracy. And as John just said, you are going to decide the future, the fortune, and the fate of the state of Texas. And you take it seriously. You're not waiting until November or October or even September to get after it, to be about it. You're here 8 months away from the deciding and defining election, I would argue, of our lives right here in the state of Texas. And there's nowhere else I'd rather be than right here with you. Nothing else I'd rather be doing than running this campaign with, by, and for you. And nothing is going to make any of us happier than winning this on the 8th of November. I want to thank Councilmember Harper Madison for hosting us here in her district, getting us kicked off, and working one of the most important jobs in this democracy. I was also a council member for 6 years in El Paso. And it's one of the most rewarding, fulfilling, toughest jobs that I can imagine in government. This is where the rubber meets the road. This council members get the calls when you have a great idea for economic development in Austin, when you're concerned about issues of gentrification in East Austin, when your trash didn't get picked up yesterday, when your neighbor's dog is barking too loud, you get the phone calls. And you are able to listen to, understand, and serve the people of this community. Because there's no interference, there's no buffer, there's nothing between you and those that you represent, serve, and deliver for. So we want to thank you for your public service and for having us out here today. And then this guy, John Busey, who was crazy enough to run in a deep red district that everyone, and he just told us right now, even Democrats are saying, don't do this to yourself, to your family, to your supporters, to the people who are going to be knocking on doors for you. You're just going to set them up to have a broken heart at the end of the day. And we're Democrats in the state of Texas. We know what that broken heart feels like all too well. We don't need any more of that. But John had faith not so much in himself, but in the people that he wanted to represent and serve. And he knew that if he got on their doors, if he had conversations with them directly, face to face, eyeball to eyeball, about the issues that matter most, not so much as a Democrat, and not all about John Busey, but what is possible when we do this together. That's where the magic happens. That's what he was able to do, not just in 2018, but in the years leading up to that. That's what we're doing right now. You know the conventional wisdom out there, right? This state has not elected a Democrat to be governor since the year 1990, when Ann Richards and and I said, look, you all have been in the wilderness so long. You're not going to be able to find your way to the light. There just aren't enough Democratic voters out there. I think we know something quite different. I think John proved it, you all proved it, in his district and in that race. You wouldn't be here. You're not just hanging out for the free beer. I'm getting a signal from my team. There's no free beer here. I'm sorry about that. Set you guys up for some heartbreak right there. No, you're here because you believe in this, and you know that your action is going to produce the outcome that you believe in. You don't believe in it because someone else told you it was going to happen, or someone's going to deliver it for you, or as John said, some cavalry is going to ride to the rescue and save the day for all of us. You know that this one's on you, and it's on me, and it's on all of us, and it is the beauty of our form of government. It's the exception, not the rule around the world. You see it right now in Ukraine as Russia invades. It's the exception, not the rule in world history. I mean, this form of government, all of us get together in a town hall meeting like this. They were doing this stuff in Athens, minus the microphones, 2,500 years ago. And then it's extinguished from the face of the planet for millennia until it reappears right here in this land. Absolutely imperfect, and only for some initially. But over time, through meetings like these, and people who have the courage of their convictions, like John and all of you who supported him in that race, we were able to enlarge and expand this democracy. And I'll tell you a story that is really timely, at least for me. 57 years ago, yesterday, our fellow Texan, the first Texan to assume the presidency of this country, Lyndon Baines Johnson, convened a joint session of Congress. Every member of the House, every United States senator in that chamber together. A week before, John Lewis had attempted to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, and was literally beaten back, and he himself was beaten down, as were those who attempted to cross that bridge with him. Not for themselves, and not just for people who looked like them, but for every single American who was alive and breathing in that moment. And every one of us who are here today, long after those who tried to cross that bridge had passed, they were marching for our ability to participate in this democracy, to have our voice heard, to have our ballot counted, to know that we matter just as much as anyone else, regardless of the color of our skin, to whom we pray, how we love, the zip code from which we come, the fact that we may be a fifth-generation Texan, or we may have been a citizen all of 5 days. In this great democracy, at least that's what we were telling ourselves at the time, all of us should be able to count equally and to be able to have our say. That's all he was trying to do. And that's what LBJ, Isaac, reminded that joint session of Congress for. He said, these men and women who just got beaten back and one lost their life in the process, just won the right to vote. And you, ladies and gentlemen, mostly it was gentlemen at the time of the United States Congress, you have the power to confer it. Now, what the hell are you going to do? I'm paraphrasing. Central to that speech was the example that had precipitated that moment, the catalyst. John Lewis put his life on the line, which is not unlike veterans in 1944 landing on the beaches of Normandy, fighting fascism half the world away to defend democracy right here at home. Every man, Republican, Democrat, Jew, Muslim, Christian, atheist alike, going over on those transport carriers, defined not by their differences, but by their common love of this country. The oath they swore not to a man or to a political party, but to the Constitution and our way of life. Every single one of them went over. Not every single one of them would come back. It's exactly the spirit displayed by John Lewis and those who marched with him on that day. We, ladies and gentlemen, have inherited their sacrifice, their service, their struggle. What we do with it now at this moment, I believe, is going to define not just those of us here in Texas, but this country forever after. The other anchor to that speech, beyond John Lewis and what had happened on Bloody Sunday in Selma on the 7th of March, 1965, was a schoolhouse in Cotulla, Texas. You all may know this story. When he was at Texas State, I think back then known as Southwest Teachers College, in San Marcos, he needed to make some money for the next semester. And so he goes down to Cotulla, Texas, to teach at the Mexican school, which is what they call the Wellhausen School. That was a school where the Mexican-American kids went to. But if you were Mexican-American back then, you were Mexican. And you were thought of by those in power as less than the white kids in that same community who went to the school that had all the bells and whistles, the best teachers and educators, all the resources that they could possibly want. At the Wellhausen School, for the Mexican kids, well, they're all going to be farmhands. They're all going to be working with their hands. They're never going to be involved in government. They don't really need to learn letters. They don't need to engage in athletics or civics because that's just not their role. LBJ got there, and he said, to hell with all that. You kids are just as important as any other kid. Those kids on the other side of the track, you can kick their ass. And I'm going to help you to do that. Out of his own pocket. And listen, anyone who's an educator in this room knows exactly what LBJ was doing because you do the same thing. You may be working a second or third job, but you're always out of your own pocket paying for the success of those kids. And you're LBJ out of his own pocket is buying the supplies for these kids. He's buying the bats and the balls so they can field athletic teams, so they can hold their heads high, so they can have some pride in what they're doing and who they are. Absolutely transformative what his presence did in that community. And I know that from reading the histories and in meeting some of the younger brothers and sisters and children and grandchildren of those who were at the Wellhausen School in 28, 29. In that speech 57 years ago yesterday, he talks about that classroom in Cotulla, Texas, and how that's also the reason that the Congress needed to pass voting rights. Our ability to have some say in the course and direction that our school board, our city council, our commissioners court, our state reps, our governor, United States president, and Congress with them, that they take, that should be open to all of us. It's the only way that we're guaranteed to be reflected in our own government. The extraordinary beauty and diversity of this country must be seen in those who are in the positions of public trust. That was the case he made, and it was pretty compelling, because within a few months, he's signing that legislation into law. And for the first time, really since Reconstruction, this country has a multiracial democracy. And what's so amazing to me about that story is that Texas, prior to LBJ, had perfected the science and the art of disenfranchising voters based on the color of their skin or their country of national origin. I say that because right now Texas is perfecting the science of disenfranchising voters based on the color of their skin, whether they have a disability, what country they came from originally, how much money they make, what city they live in. Those in power right now are trying to choose their voters instead of the other way around. 7 million Texans in 2020, arguably the most important presidential election in American history back to 1864 at least. 7 million Texans who were eligible to vote did not cast a ballot in this state. Now, are they lazy? Do they love democracy any less than anybody else in any other state? Or is it that we place some obstacle in their way? That they are the targets of the suppression and intimidation that we know so much about, that John Busey and his colleagues and Representative Cole labored day and night to stop. But despite their best efforts, those in power were able to prevail and to functionally draw out millions of our fellow Texans. Now that could be the end of the story if we choose to put a period right there and close the book.
No.
I'm hearing it may not be the course you want to take. But in the same way that Johnson and those who inspired him in that classroom in Cotulla and John Lewis were the answer to the voter suppression that existed, to the Jim Crow that prevailed before 1964 and 1965, we are going to be the answer to what is taking place in Texas right now.
Yeah, we are!
Yes. Catherine Fisher just told me that we now have 56,000 volunteers who signed up to we have phone calls, reach out to 7 million eligible non-voting Texans, and bring them into this election. Think of that number, 7 million. We only lost to Ted Cruz by 215,000 votes. There are a lot more of those out there who've been the targets of this suppression than there are those who provided the margin of defeat in 2018. And wouldn't it be some extraordinary political poetic justice for the very people who are targeted for suppression to be the margin of victory in 2022? Democracy also means that we listen to one another. And we may disagree over the course of the conversation, but we're going to do so civilly. We're going to hear each other out. None of us are the enemy. Doesn't matter who you voted for in the last election, what party you might belong to before, any of those things. We're Texans, we're Americans, we're human beings, we're going to treat one another that way. So, it's hard for me to think of a more perfect place for us to realize it than a public school classroom. If it's working right, and it doesn't always work right, you have kids who come together despite the color of their skin or any other difference between them, including ideally income. And they see themselves and define each other not by their differences, but by what they have in common. We're not just learning how to read and how to write and how to add up in these classrooms. We're learning how to be good and kind and compassionate with one another. We're learning the basics of democracy and civics that make this incredibly noble experiment possible. Now, I say there's some challenges. Some classrooms in some parts of the state are more segregated today than they were on the eve of Brown versus Board in 1954. We have to be aware of that, right? We have some challenges where we are self-selecting within where we live and who lives with us and whose ideas we are exposed to and what differences we know exist in the world and how we make sure that our kids aren't afraid of those differences, but instead engage and celebrate them because they make us so special as a state, as a people, and as a country. But those teachers who, in addition to the instruction, those counselors who sometimes face 500 to 1, 1,000 to 1 odds in some of these school districts. Those librarians who have people coming into their libraries right now and carting off books because we're somehow scared of learning in this state right now, at least the people in power are. Those who are in front of those kids trying to save their lives after 2 years of a pandemic that has carried off more than 80,000 of our fellow Texans, that has put more children in the hospital in this state than in any other. Those kids who've lost grandparents, whose parents in many cases have lost their jobs, who've been disconnected and dislocated from their peers. If they were lucky enough to have internet access and a device, maybe they could see them across Zoom. So often they dropped out and they're unaccounted for right now. Those teachers, beyond all the things that we ask them to do, are literally right now keeping those kids alive. And I know that from listening to teachers across the state of Texas who so often with tears in their eyes say, hey Beto, I need some help. The last thing I need right now is a high stakes, high pressure, standardized test. These kids are under so much pressure, so much hassle. Please let me do it with them. Last thing that I need is someone telling me which version of Texas history I can teach. I think the kids in this state are strong enough to know the true story of who we are. The last thing I need that though is somebody from the governor's office saying that I need to find out which transgender kids have parents who are trying to help them right now. And we're going to pursue those parents and potentially take those children from their home and any other child who's in the household on the accusation that those parents are abusing those kids. These teachers who are so underpaid against the national average by at least $7,500, so they're working a second or third job just to make ends meet. These retired teachers who have not seen a cost of living adjustment since 2004, and as inflation goes through the roof, they're stuck on a fixed income because the 9th largest economy on the planet cannot find the additional resources to pay them what they're really worth. These teachers, they are committed to any hope we have of fully realizing this democracy. So I want to tell you, of all the key differences between Greg Abbott and Beto O'Rourke, I want you to know that I will have the back of every public school educator in this state. And I want you to know this, that in addition to the cruelty of pursuing these transgender children and their families, by the way, in addition to the cruelty of attacking women across the state of Texas who've been denied their reproductive health care freedom and ability to make their own decisions about their own lives. In addition to the cruelty and incompetence that we saw from this governor when the lights went out, not because of God or Mother Nature or anything to do with anyone other than those in the highest positions of power who could not keep the power going on for all of us. We are losing the opportunity to focus on the big, important things. Making sure that we create better jobs for the people in Texas so they're not working a second and third job. Making sure that we fully fund these public schools so that they are the best in the country. Doing common, smart, bipartisan things like expanding Medicaid so more people can see the doctor and afford to get care and things that no Texan is going to argue with me on, like legalizing marijuana, so we no longer and fixing problems that we've known about for years. Child Protective Services, where 3 times a district court judge. It's all right. It's okay. Let's hear it for the young DJ. You all have been so polite as I've been talking, and this kid was like, all right, that's enough. We get your point. Last thing I promise. CPS, we've known for years that the most vulnerable among us, 30,000 kids in CPS care and custody right now. So many of them sleeping on desks, in hallways, underneath tables, because we have failed to provide the resources for this incredibly important agency. And then we just found out last week that 7 young girls, ages 11 to 17, were rescued from those who were trafficking them for sex, renting out their bodies to some pretty evil people across the state of Texas. Well, the state rescues them, turns them over to a state-supported shelter where the employees there have turned around and trafficked them for sex, renting out their young bodies to people across the state of Texas. Greg Abbott, for 6 weeks, knew that this was going on before they removed those kids from that shelter not too far from here in Bastrop. Now, talk about the perverse, twisted priorities in this state right now. When you have 23 kids who died in CPS custody over the last 2 years, when you have these 7 girls who are being trafficked right now, when you have real needs in our classrooms and in our communities, this guy has a fixation on these transgender children, bullying them, scaring them, and putting so many of them through hell right now. When we win this race together, we're going to start being good to one another, focusing on the big things. She has got a microphone. If you have a question or a comment or a suggestion, we want to hear from you.
Yes, ma'am. Hi, Bethel. Great honor. I had to write down this question because I knew I probably wouldn't remember. But I know you spoke a lot about education. So what exactly is your strategy to target some of the issues in our education system pertaining to culture loss and teacher pay and shortages?
We are losing, this is pre-pandemic, by the way, we were losing 1/3 of new Texas teachers within their first 5 years of service. So it's not just what we paid to hire them and to train them, it's the debt that they took, tens of thousands, sometimes more than $100,000 for the privilege of teaching our kids or being that counselor or working in some support role in our public schools, and then we lose them within the first 5 years. Right now, when asked, 2/3 of current Texas teachers are thinking about leaving the profession. If I were the governor right now, in addition to canceling the STAR test, I would listen to every single teacher in the state and ask them, what do I have to do to make sure that you stay in this profession? Because you didn't get into it for the fame or the glory or the money. You're obviously answering a call to public service, just like LBJ did in 1928. And I want to make sure that we are there for you. Here's what I'm hearing back when I ask that question. One is, we know money will not solve every problem. But if you're not making enough so that you have to work another job, or maybe 2 other jobs, let's at least pay teachers that national average. So it's $7,500 more per year per teacher going forward, just for starters. I don't know if we put a policy around this, and the state reps might be able to help me to do this, but let's treat them with the respect that they deserve. Let's ensure that we acknowledge them as the professionals upon whom we depend, instead of dictating to them, you mentioned culture, what it is they can and cannot teach, or asking them to perform to this high-stakes, standardized test. So many teachers have told me that they got in this profession to unlock that lifelong love of learning in those kids who are before them. And what they find themselves doing is test prep and ensuring those kids know how to take that test, because so much of their accountability and their school's accountability and literally their grade depends on that. So let's have some kind of accountability in testing, but let's make sure it's more diagnostic in nature so that we push resources where they're needed. We're not out to punish people or be punitive. We want to be helpful where we can and ensure every kid's able to rise to their full potential. What about all-day pre-K in every single part of this state? So at 3 years old and 4 years old, a kid is stabilizing with other kids, beginning to learn to read, which is so important, and it's reflected in 3rd and 4th grade reading scores. And Mus, their mom, their dad is now freed up to finish their education, to go to work, to start a job, to tour the country in a punk rock band, while their kids whatever it is that they want to do that's going to allow them to fulfill their potential as well. And then last idea. Right now, our public supported education really ends at 12th grade. What if we expanded it in Texas to community college as well?
I'll wait for your answer till you drink that. So, here's my question. The other party is a single voice party. They're not a tent party, they're a single voice. We're a big tent party. How do we get our message out that doesn't sound like we're weak or that we're fractured? So there's so many people that want to vote, but they see in our own discussions how fractured we are because we have multiple ideas. As the governor of Texas, how do you rein in these elected officials if reining in is what it is that we need to do? How do we get our message out so they stop defining us?
Great question. Here's something that I think distinguishes Texas, and maybe the Texas Democrat, against those that we see nationally, where there are these significant pitched battles taking place over ideology and orthodoxy, and who really counts and who should be listened to, and who we want in the party. In Texas, I mean, what Representatives Busey and Cole were able to execute during the regular and in the first special legislative session is extraordinary. To have literally almost every single member of their caucus not only on the same page of an issue, not only willing to walk out of the chambers to deny the Republican majority the ability to pass voter suppression laws, but to get on airplanes and maybe risk arrest, maybe risk the loss of their jobs and their source of income, be away from their kids for months. They were able to do that together. So I see extraordinary unity on the issues that matter most. And democracy, it's hard for me to find a more important one. So at least within Texas, that is not as much my fear. But to the spirit of your question, if we're going to win this, we're not just going to win this with Democrats. Okay? We're going to have to appeal to independents, sometimes known as swing voters, and we've got to be open to Republicans. There are a lot of Republicans out there for whom what this governor has done, the 700 plus killed during the grid failure, the fact that you're paying an additional $45 a month on your utility bills because he allowed the billionaires to steal from us and we end up footing the bill each and every single month for the next 20 years, the extremism, the fringe politics, the failure to address the big things like jobs and schools and expanding Medicaid, they're open. And if they realize that we're not here to judge, we don't care who you voted for last time, we're just focused fiercely and firmly on the future of the state, and we want you to be part of it, I think we can win their vote. Let me tell you this number, which blows me away. In 2018, when I was running for senator and Abbott was running for re-election as governor, 500,000 of our fellow Texans voted for both of us. Voted for me for senator, and those same 500,000 voted for him for governor. We only lost by 216,000 votes. Now, I don't know if they were independents or Republicans or some cases Democrats, but it should be a lesson to us that we cannot afford to write anybody off or to take anybody for granted. So, as often as you will see me here in Austin, and I always love being here, you're also going to see us in places like Johnson City, where we were last Saturday. We're going to be traveling to Dalhart and Boys Ranch and Abernathy and Amarillo and Pampa and Canadian and Lubbock, and there's about 40 more towns in the Panhandle that I'm tempted to name off right now. But we're going to all those places, and we don't care how rural or reliably red they're supposed to be. They're our fellow Texans, and we're going to make sure that this message of jobs, great schools, and the ability to see a doctor is one that is heard by them. We are going to unify this very fractured state that you just described. Thanks for the question. Thanks for being involved.
Future Governor O'Rourke, I have a question specifically. Expanding on what you talked about with our Child Protective Services program, I mean, we all know that hundreds, even thousands of youth are being misplaced, are being lost in the system. They're coming out of the system worse off than they would have been if they were left with their parents, who they were presumably removed for abuse or some other significant life event. What can you do? And just to kind of piggyback on that, how are you going to do it when there is legislative body that is very one-sided right now and couldn't stand in the way of it?
Yeah. Let me answer this really good question because we pointed out the cost and consequence of the government and what Abbott is doing, what he's failed to do. 23 kids dead in the foster care system over a 2-year period. These young girls who've just been trafficked twice over, once by the state of Texas. The kids sleeping under desks. So how do we fix this? A couple things. One, there is a federal program called Families First that prioritizes keeping kids with their families. If we can make it work within that household, that is the best possible outcome. versus the alternative of literally taking that kid, perhaps by force, from their parents, or from their grandparents, or from their family members. The federal government is willing to give us tens of millions of dollars to implement this, and just in the same way that we rejected Medicaid expansion to the tune of $100 billion that we've lost here in Texas because of that, we're losing tens of millions in this Family First program. So I'm going to take yes for an answer. I'm going to accept that help, and we're going to prioritize trying to keep kids with their families when the kids' safety and well-being is going to be assured within that family situation. Second, we're going to invest heavily in mental health care access in the state of Texas. We know the largest provider of mental health care services in Texas is the county jail system. Right now, how messed up is that? And we know those kids need access to mental health care help, but their parents and family members do as well. And sometimes that will be enough to resolve whatever the outstanding problem is within that household. So that's point number 2. Point number 3 is the state of Texas is going to have to invest more in CPS. So more caseworkers, but also more accountability. When we've got kids sleeping under desks or, of course, being trafficked, we've got to know that, right? We've got to prevent it from ever happening. And should we ever falter or fail, we've got to correct it immediately. The first ruling from this judge that I talked about was 6 years ago. She said that these kids leave the system, age out of foster care, more damaged than when they came in. Her latest ruling, her third ruling last month, said that the problem, as bad as it was, has gotten worse. It's going to take some investment, some accountability, and making this a priority. Last thing is, if we cannot keep those kids with their parents, we've got to try to place them with other family members like their grandparents. We know that this works. We have to do our due diligence and make sure that's the right step. Those are 4 steps that we can take to dramatically improve the outcomes and the well-being of these kids who are in our custody and our care. Thanks for asking.
Hello, sir. Good to see you. Thank you for coming back to Austin. Always great to see you. So my name is Jeffrey Clemens. I live here in Austin. I'm in Tillotson. Today what I want to ask you about is that we've seen Governor Abbott use his power responsibly over the past several months. Me and my friends here went to the legislature copious a number of times last summer to advocate against so many terrible bills because Abbott wanted to call session after session. And so my question is, as Governor, how are you going to use your power responsibly? Will you call special sessions to address all of these important issues that need working on right now?
I know you've done that because I've seen you at the Capitol testifying, rallying, and advocating, and encouraging. So thank you. You don't have to be in that office to lead, and you are a great example of that. It's funny, I was, making my pitch to a prospective voter, and they said, look, that's great, all those things you want to do. The thing I love most is that you can have veto power. So when the batshit crazy stuff comes down, you're going to be able to stop it. That's all really everything. I said, like, you can do that. But we're also going to have to find some common ground to do the good things, because I don't think any of us aspire just to stop the bad stuff, right? I mean, that would be a big improvement over where we are right now. Granted, we'll take that as a starter. But we're going to have to find some common ground, and I'm confident that it exists. The Democratic members of the legislature who are here, the prior members of the legislature who are here, can attest there are some Republicans who get that expanding Medicaid is going to be a windfall for their districts. 24 rural hospitals, all within Republican represented districts, have closed down in the state since 2005. That means the constituents of these Republican representatives are driving hours to be able to see a doctor, having worse outcomes as a result, unable to attract and retain young people and talent and investment in their communities. It's going to do wonders for them. So let's start with that common ground. Let's pass Medicaid expansion, which will also lower property taxes and stop paying for and then there's also these other issues. I was interviewed the other day by Evan Smith, and he said, kind of to the spirit of your question, how are you going to legalize marijuana in the state of Texas. I mean, you're going to have a Republican majority legislature. And I said, Evan, Republicans like to get high just as much as Democrats. So we're going to be able to do that, right? You name the issue. I'll tell you one. It hasn't come up so far in a question. It might in a bit. But the fact that we banned abortion does not just mean that it's impossible for a woman in Texas to exercise that constitutional right and make her own decisions. And not only is it a power grab by the government, I mean, if he cared about life, you wouldn't have seen 23 kids dying in CBS I'm having this conversation with my mom, who, until her son ran for Senate, was a lifelong Republican and is an ardent Catholic. On this issue, we may not see eye to eye, but I told her, hey mom, you know, when they were closing down all those reproductive health care clinics, not only could women not get an abortion, but it was harder to get a cervical cancer screening, to get reproductive health care help at all, or to see a doctor in the least insured state. And that might explain why we're at the epicenter of a maternal mortality crisis. It is 3 times as deadly for Black women in the state of Texas. We lead the nation in the rate of teen pregnancy and repeat teen pregnancy. And my mom hearing that, she's like, that's not good. I don't want that. And so I think from there, you have some common ground to make things better. And if we are sure not to make the perfect the enemy of the good, if we'll find that place of consensus, the maximum point of agreement that we can find, then we are surely going to make this state better on every issue. You've got my commitment to do that. So, thank you guys.
How will you work with the Biden administration to put pressure on our senators to bring forth the ability of immigration reform? Because I know for me and other countless of families across the state, some of us live in here. I was born in Austin, so I've been paying attention to it, and it's time and time again. At this point, my only association, they were here, I'm a young age, I've had to live here that my parents did support. And it really is getting turned to the point where my own parents have at different points have started thinking of possibly going back to Mexico to their hometown. Where things, they're not on the streets, but our families aren't as better off as they are here. I know for me, I have a lot of privilege because I was born here, but for me, they're the reason why I really want to support. So how can we, I don't know, whether you as governor or we as continue putting pressure on them, because I'm tired of having, I don't even bother calling Senator Corning or Cruz's office because it's just I'm tired of it, and it's over 20 years I feel I'm tired of it all.
I'm so impressed by your persistence and your patience, and I think everyone would forgive you if you just said the hell with all of you. I've been working on this for 20 years, and I keep hearing from Democrats, well, give us some power. Once we're in power, we're going to change our immigration laws. And Democrats have been in power. They've had every branch of government at times in our past, and they have failed to use that power to make those changes. Republicans, on the other hand, will continue to demonize and vilify and try to scare us about immigrants using words like invasion, like infestation, which is how we talk about cockroaches and rats, not how we should be describing human beings. Greg Abbott saying you must defend yourselves, take matters in your own hands. That was his message to the people of Texas days before some guy took matters into his own hands, drove to El Paso, slaughtered 23 people, claiming that he was repelling the invasion of Hispanics coming to take over this state and replace him. What we're doing is clearly not working. And in the case of the governor, it is getting people killed in our communities. What if we used our power as the defining immigrant state? My hometown of El Paso, Texas, 24% of those with whom I live were born in another country. primarily Mexico. And we are one of, if not the safest cities in America, not in spite of, but because they show us not to live. They're making us better and stronger and safer than we otherwise would be. Instead of stoking anxiety and fear for political gain, what if we use this power and worked with our new member of Congress, Greg Casar, from this team, and the president, whatever party they may be from, and brought not just Democrats, but Republicans to the table and said, look, we have a Texas solution to this challenge, and we're willing to do our part. And whether that means investment, whether that means defining the particulars of the policy, whether it means bringing our congressional delegations together, we should be leading on this. Now, look, we might be tempted to say this is a federal issue outside of our purview. What can we do? But no one else happens to be leading on this right now. And I think it's a great opportunity for the next governor of Texas to insist upon and ensure that we finally have this change. Because I never want you to have to ask another question like this one at another town hall in front of another candidate, right? It's been since 1986 that we've had meaningful immigration reform in this country. That is far too long. There's one state that I think has the power to change this dynamic, and it's this state, and it's you and me and others working together. So thank you for being here. Such a good question. I'll tell you what, this is going to sound so cheese dog and corny, but actually hearing you and knowing that you're here and that you sat through all that stuff I said at the beginning and you still stuck around and you're asking this question and you took a chance and you voted in 2018 and folks said, look, you're wasting your time, you're wasting your vote. You got us really close, producing the biggest turnout in Texas since 1970. Young voter turnout. And your example is up 504% from the previous election. I look at what you and others, what we all did in 2018, and I see that as the base from which we are moving right now. I mentioned those 500,000 voters. We only need to win, less than half of them in order to beat Greg Abbott. The 7 million out there, we're going to bring them all in. What if we brought in just 5%? The folks who have been targeted for voter suppression because they have a disability or because they now have to match the same ID with which they originally used to register, with which they are trying to vote right now. Willie Nelson, tell me there's a bigger Texas hero denied the right to vote 3 times in this last election. And in fact, the bigger Texas hero that I can think of, a 95-year-old veteran who was one of those who fought to save democracy and fight fascism in World War II, denied the right to vote in this state. As long as there's that level of injustice, these girls I talked about in Bastrop who are being trafficked, the folks who are trying so hard to make change, I've got to do my part as well. And that fires me up and excites me and motivates me. And as long as you're going to be in this, I'm going to be in this. So we're going to do this together, right? And all of us.
And so these are very crucial things that will affect our children's futures. And right now there's like 37 states that have bills that are limiting what teachers can say in school and what they can't say and things like that. So as our children are going through school, if they're not able to learn the true history of our country, then that is detrimental. And I'll say this too, I think Austin or Travis County did some rebudgeting, and the last time I called 911, they asked me, do you want fire, police, or mental health? So that's a byproduct of defund the police. So we just need to understand what these things are.
I was researching some of the things I talked about at the beginning. LBJ, the Well Housing School in Cotulla, Texas in 28-29. The history of voter disenfranchisement in the state of Texas, the white primary law that existed from 1923 to 1944. It blows my mind that for 21 years, if you were black, legally you could not vote in the state of Texas in the 20th century, at a time that some of those who could not vote were fighting for democracy in Europe. And I came across this story that I kind of heard tangentially, but I didn't know all the details of. It's a woman named Thelma White, who was born and raised in El Paso in the 1940s and 1950s. And she attended the all-black Douglas High School. It was the only high school she could go to in El Paso. And she graduates valedictorian. And she attempts to enroll at Texas Western College, now known as University of Texas at El Paso, and she's denied based on the color of her skin. And she engages with this outfit known as the NAACP, with this attorney named Thurgood Marshall, and they take this case to the Western District Court. And they end up prevailing, and Judge R.E. Thompson not only orders the integration of Texas Western College, he orders the integration of all public higher ed in the state of Texas. I was never taught that story in El Paso. I'm in El Paso, she was in El Paso. That is a source of common pride. That should be the first thing that I learned in second or third grade, or whenever it is appropriate, and when I can finally comprehend it. But not even in high school. I learned that on my own. Somebody told me that story, and I went out and researched it. And I think this, if Thelma White, imagine the courage she had. If she was strong enough to go challenge segregation in higher ed in El Paso in 1954, then our kids today in 2022 are strong enough to learn and know her story and be inspired. Thanks for being here and asking the question.
Here we go.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Orr. My name is Chris. Two-part question really quickly. Where in our federal constitution is abortion a right? Is it explicitly within there? And then secondarily, at what point do you believe baby in the womb is a sentient being? How late are you willing to allow abortions to go, how many weeks to help?
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. So the answer to your first question was decided 49 years ago in the decision Roe versus Wade. Again, Texas playing a critical role in that decision and that outcome. And until this year, it's the right to privacy, I think, was the specific citation made by the justices in 49 years ago. To the second question, the best way for me to answer it is I trust a woman to make that decision.
Mr. Orr, thank you for being here. My name is Doug Green. Number one, I just want to honestly our thoughts and prayers for President Zelensky in Ukraine and the people of Ukraine. I need your help. We're talking about sex trafficking, and I don't need money. I've received funding. We want to open up some residential treatment facilities to help people that are suffering from trauma and addiction. It includes refugees, it includes victims of sex trafficking, alcoholics, and addicts. Fundamentally, the way that we have been treating addicts is wrong, right? The idea of abstinence is absurd, okay? The idea, do we care if a heroin addict is smoking marijuana? We do not, right? Do we care if an alcoholic is smoking marijuana? We do not. And so we are looking at purchasing property, 31 acres here in Austin. We're looking at about insurance companies to how they reimburse funding for treatment. We're currently speaking with some very large restaurant organizations, people that I'm sure you're aware of, that I can't mention right now. But we would love to have working farm and ranch. We would like to be part of the corporate supply chain, supplying both people and product into the solution, so that when an organization wants to open up a restaurant, they have people, both cooks, servers, staff. And so on these campuses, we will have a working restaurant, and we would like to have a soda bar, right? Just kind of revolutionize kind of how we are treating people that are suffering from addiction or trauma, from sexual abuse. Your answer to this question, you got my support regardless of your answer to this question, but I would really love your answer.
Thanks for being here and for sharing this and for being willing to work with us. So I would like to thank you for we met with a group in Dallas who is working on some related issues, helping people with addiction, people who've been through trauma, people who are experiencing homelessness. And they have done a number of things, including building these tiny homes and having sustained, reliable housing, which is so important before anything else. Know that I've got a roof over my head that I can depend on, and count on, and go to. The counseling, the mental and primary healthcare services. And the kicker for me, beyond doing all this good and meeting the moral imperative, was the fact that it was saving the people of Dallas significant amounts of money. When someone does not receive this care, they're likely to get it in the county jail or in the emergency room at extraordinary rates that the taxpayer ends up paying at the end of the day. For a fraction of that, they can actually get care, job training, connection to employment, fulfillment, purpose, the things that they have been missing because they didn't have that help to begin with. And it's the right thing to do. We save money while we're doing it. It's great policy. And I would love for Texas to have pride of place in going from 50th in these kind of state-supported services across the country to being #1 before our term ends as governor. That would be awesome. We're going to need local leaders like you to get that done. So thank you for being here and for being willing to do that. Appreciate it. She kind of scared you. She crept up on you.
Thank you so much for being there. I'm going to get help and I'm actually just here to see what Texas is. In 2019 at the Irish Federation, and it was, I'm still shaking because it was so awesome. Thank you for supporting women and us having autonomy over our bodies.
So this is tough because to the spirit of the question that was answered earlier. And look, we're going to do everything we can to help these Democrats get enough new members so that they're the majority, right? We want that majority if we can work to get these things done. But there's also a good chance that we're going to have a Republican majority. We're not willing to accept that as our fate right now. We're going to work for the other result. But let's just say that we do, right? We're going to have to find that common ground on these issues. What has been so encouraging for me, and hopefully you've experienced this as well, is it's not just the people who have traditionally been voting for Democrats, or for whom this was a major issue for them that they advocated around for most of their lives. It's people who for the first time are waking up to this, because they watched that bill signing ceremony, where the governor is proudly saying that he's banned abortion in the state of Texas, and a reporter has the audacity to remind the governor that there's no exception for incest or rape. And Governor, what are you going to do about that? He says, well, we're going to eliminate rape in the state of Texas. We'd love to ask him how that's going, right? Clearance rate for violent crimes in Texas under Greg Abbott's watch, murder and rape included, over the last 7 years has declined from 7% to 50%. We're catching fewer people. We're not bringing the justice that those victims deserve. And by definition and default, we're making sure that more of that happens until we take this seriously. That might open some eyes. In fact, I know it has, just from people asking questions like this one at town halls, who are Republicans or independents or otherwise would not have voted for me. So I say that because I think that's the context to do what we need to do next. We need to reopen these reproductive health care clinics, which didn't just shut down after last year, but over the last 10 years, because there's been a sustained, consistent attack, one legislative session after the other. We need to reopen them, not only for women's constitutionally protected right to access an abortion, but for all those other reasons I just mentioned that are literally life and death for the women of Texas. We're losing more of them here than in almost any other state or any other developed nation because of the backward policies that we have pursued. And if you need any further proof to show you how out of line we are with the rest of the country and the rest of the world, Mexico is liberalizing their access to reproductive health care at the same time we were taking away from the women in the state of Texas. So let's make that case together, and let's not just make it to the converted or the people who already feel the way that we do. Let's listen to those who have legitimately held personal, strong beliefs that are a little bit different than ours, and find out where that common ground is to work together. But I think reopening these clinics, making sure that women can make these own decisions, not criminalizing doctors or others who try to assist a woman. There's now a $10,000 bounty on the back of anyone who assists any woman in the state of Texas that any American can attempt to cash in on. There's a lot of work for us to do, and I would start with those first few issues, and I know that we can get better. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Cynthia says that that was our last question. Thank you. For anyone who is willing to hang out and take a picture with us, because it's the way that we prove that we were alive to the people of the future, and also to build support on social media, on your platforms as you post it. We're going to be outside of those back doors under this beautiful sky before we lose the light, and we'd love to have you join us. Is that where we're going, Cynthia? Thank you all for being here.